Okay, good morning. All right, we are officially up and running, so thank you all for your patience as we work all that out. My name is Susan Emery. I'm the director of the Quality Enhancement Plan here at Forsyth Tech. And on behalf of the full QEP team, I'd like to welcome you today to our event. And hopefully by now you know all about our QEP, and it's a 5-year plan focused on information literacy skills to help build information literacy skills for our students so that you can be more successful here at Forsyth Tech, as well as in your further educational pursuits and in the workplace. So hopefully through today's keynote discussion or keynote presentation and the panel discussion that follows, you'll all get a chance to get a glimpse at what it takes to get prepared and what skills you need to learn to be successful in today's workplace. All right, so just a couple housekeeping notes before we do get started. If you will please turn off your cell phones. And I know people have different schedules. If you do have to get up and leave at the end of the session for another class, please do so quietly and courteously. And if you do have a question at the end of the session, we might have time for student questions. We'll have a microphone passing around. Since we are streaming to centers, we ask that you use the microphone so that everyone can hear your question. And without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Shannon Stanley, who's our QEP marketing lead, and she's also our coordinator of the Adult High School and GED program, to officially introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. I would like to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. She is still celebrating her recent promotion to the Dean of the Library at California State University, Maritime. While her career began as a news researcher, for the past 5 years, she has coordinated the information fluency program at the college, as well as contributed heavily as a research associate in Project Information Literacy, which is a national study about early adults' information-seeking behaviors and competencies at the University of Washington's Information School. Since 2011, she has published multiple information literacy related papers and has traveled the country presenting at national conferences as a content specialist in the field of information literacy. She is also currently serving on the assessment committee of the California Maritime Council of Library Deans and uses her expertise as an official reviewer for the Journal of Information Literacy. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today Miss Michele Van Hoeck. Give her a warm welcome. Thank you, Michele.
Testing. Hi, everyone. Really glad to be here. I'm going to start my slide presentation. Okay, I've got two things to work here, a clicker and a microphone. Let's see if I can do this. So I'm here today to talk to you about a research study that I was part of. I've worked with Project Information Literacy. It's kind of a side job for me. My regular job is in the library at Cal Maritime. And my sort of research interest is with this project that's gone on for many years. I'll tell you a little bit about it. The study I'll tell you about today is my favorite one. The reason it's my favorite is because normally we work, when the description says we work with young adults, that means usually students at colleges. And this is the only study until, actually there's one going on right now, but at the time it was the only study that where I got to leave the campus. And I talked to employers on the phone about how things were going with the college grads that they hired. So it was a great taste of the real world, if you will, in terms of leaving the academic environment. So here's the Project Information Literacy logo. Like I said, we're actually in the middle of our 7th study. So it's been an ongoing process of lots of different surveys and focus groups and interviews. Everything that I'm going to tell you today is on the Project Information Literacy website. Every report that the study issues is available for free on the website. It's open access, so if you're curious about anything further, you will find more information online. I'll give the URL at the end. Okay, so because I used to work for a newspaper, sometimes I like to do a real quick who, what, when, where, why, and how. So I'm going to tell you the bare bones about who's involved in this study, et cetera. So I'm not the lead. The lead is Dr. Allison Head. She's an old friend of mine, and I was really lucky to get to work with her on this study because it's been really, really interesting and a great learning experience for me. The workplace study that I'll tell you about today had a team of 3 librarians and 2 graduate students at the University of Washington, in addition to Dr. Head. So the what of this study, this is a qualitative study. And so for students in the room, this is a little bit of information literacy education. Sometimes when you read about research studies in the news, it's a great big survey with lots and lots of participants, and that's usually a quantitative study, big focus on numbers, big focus on charts and data. We have data in qualitative studies too, but qualitative studies are smaller number of people involved, but that usually means we can go more in-depth conversations, more in-depth discussion. So this study was in 2 parts. We did a series of interviews over the phone with employers. We also had focus groups, so we brought together some recent college grads, by recent it was the last 5 years, and talked to them in a room for an hour and asked them some questions. I was really proud of our sample, and the sample is the group that was involved in the study of employers because it had a wide range of industries. There were people from newspapers, people from manufacturing, engineering firms. There was one from the Port of Los Angeles, which is a big employer for the Maritime Academy, where I work, altogether 23. And there were 33 recent college grads in 4 different focus groups. I'd like to point out that the first focus group listed there is from a community college, the one that's that's closest to where I live, Santa Rosa Junior College. The other 3 were 4-year schools. So here's the when. As I said, PIL started a while ago. In 2008 was our first study. 2012 is the study I'll talk to you about today. Here's the where. The stars here show where the focus groups happened. This is why we needed a team of people involved, because we didn't fly around the country to do these. We had our associates in different colleges lead these discussion groups. And then here are the stars that show where the employers were. And again, I'm really pleased that we got some geographic diversity. We can't claim with a qualitative study we represent the whole U.S., but at the very least, I'm not standing here saying that we only talk to employers in California. And the why is pretty much the reason that I'm here, the reason that I came this far to tell you about the study that I like so much. I teach a class in information literacy. I run the program for my school, and I have to say sometimes students don't understand what the point is. Sometimes they don't see the connection between getting a research paper assignment and writing bibliographies and citing sources and learning all that, what seems to be academic stuff. My students, particularly at the Maritime Academy, don't always understand what the value is or what the application is to the workplace. And sometimes I wondered myself. I knew they needed it for school. I knew that they needed these skills to do well in school. And I knew there were some things that were clearly applicable to the workplace, but I really wondered how much. I really wondered to what extent they would be able to use this to the workplace. And I'm really happy to tell you that I was very pleased by what I heard from employers and grad students as far as how useful the skills were. Some of the results that we had were surprising. Some of the things that I heard were surprising, and I'll share that with you. And here's the why that I try to share with other librarians and other faculty members, to remember that most of the students that we work with we're not training them to be mini professors. That's not where most students at any college are ending up. So it's really important for us to keep in mind the things that we're teaching need to have some kind of transferability to the non-academic workplace. And that most of the students that we work with, we're only going to be with them for a very short period of time. Okay, so I'm going to jump right into the findings. I'll start with what the employers told us. What we did with our interviews, after we had finished the interviews and we took our notes, we did coding. So we took a list of information literacy skills. I think there were forgotten the number. I think it was 14 different, we broke it down into 14 different skills, which for anyone in the room who's a librarian, these are the ACRL performance indicators for information literacy. We also used a set of attributes called habits of mind. This is a list of sort of approaches to learning that was developed by a Cal State professor. The habits of mind are approaches that he says are characteristic of critical thinkers. So a habit of mind might be creativity, a habit of mind might be openness to learning new things, a habit of mind might be persistence. There were 16 of these, and we coded the interviews for any evidence that of the employers saying this is what they were looking for. So the questions that we asked the employers were basically what's going well and what's not going well. So what strengths do you see new grads that you hire? What are they really good at? What do you expect them to be good at coming in the door? And then finally, what are they having trouble with? What are the challenges? What takes them a little bit longer to get up to speed on? I'm going to focus a little bit more on the challenges because I think that's where the opportunities are for us all to shift our focus. But I will tell you, the number one strength that was mentioned by employers was the ease with technology that they saw recent grads perform or indicate. The qualitative studies, I'm not going to show you charts or graphs or too many numbers. I'm going to show you quotes. For each of the results, for each of the findings, I'll give a couple of sort of telling or representative quotes. So as far as ease with technology, here's one. I'll give you a second to read it. So a lot of employers pointed to the generation difference. They knew that many of the grads they had worked with had grown up with technology in a way that they hadn't. They talked sometimes about it in terms of generation difference. Information, they find it, they take it, they blend it, they mash it up, and they repurpose it. So again, a kind of facility with making your way around the internet, making your way around a computer operating system. So how about the difficulties? What I'm going to show you are the top 4 challenges or gaps that employers saw. And if you're a student listening, this is something that you could not only pay attention to as far as growing or developing this skill, but this is a way that you could excel over other applicants. So if you are able to present yourself or develop skills that address these challenges, you're going to stand out. You're going to sort of have one over on the people that are competing with you for a job. So the number one gap, and this was the biggest surprise, and for me this is one of the biggest takeaways from the study. The number one gap had to do with what we're calling kind of the social side of research. And I should say that we didn't use the phrase information literacy with students, with employers or students. What we talked about was doing research for solving problems, doing research for making decisions, finding and using information to solve problems and make decisions. So the number one thing this idea of research in the workplace is a team effort. It's not something where you hole up in your room or you hole up in your office, work, and then present the final answer. So here's a quote from one employer. We need someone who will explore on their own and then come back to the team and say, here's my best take, what do you think? They need that ability to invite discussion and be able to redirect on the fly. So again, you're not expected necessarily, you're given a task and then you come back with the answer. It's assumed that you'll involve your team in the process. So throughout the process of researching, making decisions, it's an iterative or sort of a circular process that involves multiple people on your team, and you need to be able to communicate with your team about what you're doing and be willing and able and flexible to redirect. The sort of second side of this same finding is the idea of people as sources of information. Sometimes I think that this may not be a surprise to anyone but academics. I mean, if I think about all the research papers I've ever done, I don't think I've ever been asked as a student to cite a person. Maybe that's changing, but I think this is one of the biggest differences between how you do research in the workplace and how you do research as a student. And that's using people as sources. That doesn't mean people are the only sources, but they're part of the mix. And the employers that we talked to said it seemed like students didn't realize that that was an option, and that sometimes the only way to find an answer or the best source of information was somebody down the hall or someone they needed to pick up the phone and call. So here's the quote. They believe the computer is their workspace. And this is an employer talking about recent hires. So basic interactions between people are lost. They won't walk over and ask someone a question. They are less comfortable and have some lack of willingness to use people as sources, and also have a lack of awareness that people are a valid source of information. Now again, it's always funny to talk about a study about students, essentially, or recent graduates, when I'm talking to the audience themselves. And you may hear this and think, well, I'm not like that, or this isn't how my generation really is. And that's the great thing about presenting a study like this. We get to discuss it, and you can either kind of relate to it or not relate to it. But again, this is the sample that we had, and this was the perspective of the employers that we had from multiple workplaces across the country. So number 2, as far as the things that were mentioned most often by the employers was when you're doing research in the workplace, you need to use a variety of formats. That sounds a little dry, so here's a quote to illustrate it. There were many graduates who just looked in one place, the internet, and that was the problem. It's a whole bag of tricks you need for doing research today. So probably a lot of teachers can kind of relate or understand this complaint. Sometimes it seems like students that have grown up with Google, students have grown up with Wikipedia, they tend to go there first, and they tend to think that's the end of their search. Maybe you guys are different. Employers also notice this, and employers saw it as a problem in the workplace, because when you're solving a tough problem, or when you're trying to, say you're a business owner and you're looking ahead, and there is no real answer, you're trying to forecast something that hasn't happened yet, whatever you get is going to be imperfect. And so it's probably not something that the answer to your problem hasn't been published on the internet. You need to gather lots of evidence from lots of different sources, all of which are imperfect, and then pull it together to craft your own answer. And I think that's the goal, that's the ideal goal of a research project in college, is to bring together lots of different sources, each of which has something to offer, each of which has its weaknesses, and then craft your answer from that variety. The use of people as sources is just another sort of side of this challenge of people might be sources. Google is a source. Other online publications are a source. Maybe the best answer is Joe down the hall, who's been with the company for 20 years. Maybe there's an annual report in a binder on a shelf that everybody in the company knows about, but as a newcomer, you haven't learned about those annual reports yet. So that's the kind of variety of source types that the employers were having to correct students or educate new employees about. It's not all out there on the internet. The third item, or the third finding as far as the employers were concerned, is some difficulty for new grads in finding patterns. That's the using of what you find, not just finding, but figuring out what the pattern was. So one employer said, they have difficulty distinguishing the noise from the solid material, the good from the bad, as far as what they're finding. And then sometimes they get stuck in the mud trying to figure out what it all means. They get stuck because it's hard. It's not, I don't think it's the employers giving trivial, easy research tasks and then not understanding why recent grads can't perform. The research tasks that people are performing in the workplace are sometimes hard, and it will take iterating or discussing with your team. It will take checking multiple sources. And then the fourth challenge or difficulty was just a sort of a willingness to be thorough, to not give up too quickly. And this was also tied to the habit of mind persistence. This is a quote from a lab manager. I don't think there's a lot of that desire to go deep. They expect information to be so easy to get that when it's not, it's frustrating to them. So And this person, I actually interviewed this employer, said eventually they get it. I make sure they get it. But it's not something they necessarily always come in with, that kind of willingness to go deep. And when the problem really matters, when it's an issue of people's health, when it's an issue of maybe millions of dollars for the company, the employers are expecting the people who work for them to be thorough and to be persistent, that it's not just an exercise in the workplace. So these were the 2 of the 16 habits of mind that we coded for. These were the 2 that came up most frequently in our interviews with employers. The openness to learning was something that often came up as far as what they expected of new graduates coming in the door. So they said, we don't expect the new hire to know everything about our business, about our industry, but we do expect them to be open to learning. And they probably don't perceive that as something that they could teach. They expect you to come in being open to learning, knowing that you'll continue to learn. And then the persistence came up as a gap, something that the new grads weren't doing as well or as much as the employers were looking for. So how about the other side? How about the grads themselves? Maybe this sounds a little bit like the older generation saying, you young folks today. So let's hear what the young folks had to say, or at least the recent grads. Again, by recent, that meant someone who had graduated from college in the last 5 years. When we spoke to them, they were working. They were done with college. So we asked similar questions, but with a little different slant. We asked them what college learning experiences have been most applicable, what's been most useful to you as a new worker based on your college education, and then what's difficult about solving information problems in the workplace. What's hard? What have you found to be hard? So this is a quote. I'm going to give you a second to just read it. This is pretty illustrative of the general level of sort of stress that we heard expressed in the focus groups, as far as that time in your life when you're done with college and you're a working person now, and it's a totally different environment. A lot of things are different, and there was kind of a general level of stressed outness. My job feels like there's a perpetual thesis due, but my job is literally about finding information that does not exist. So the easy answers are not what's stressing out the grads, or the easy research tasks. It's things that are real of the workplace for which there are imperfect answers. My information needs have changed and intensified since I was a student. Okay, so what did they tell us had transferred well? What did they learn in college that they were using in the workplace as far as doing research? So the ability to evaluate sources. This is, I think, one of the QEP learning outcomes, or at Forsyth Tech, getting really good at evaluating the quality of the sources you find. And the source may be online. It's easy to look at websites and jump right into needing to evaluate them, because many of them are imperfect. But every source probably needs to be evaluated. Maybe Bob down the hall, or people as sources also being evaluated. The second thing that was mentioned was the ability to analyze those sources, critically analyze any type of source that you find. And then finally, dealing with large amounts of information. So it's not unusual, for example, in the workplace, to be given a few reports or to find several websites in a search and to be asked to summarize it. You're not going to find, say, 3 sources and then just send them those 3. You don't just forward those 3 to your boss or whoever asked for it. Your boss wants a sentence, or your boss wants a paragraph. This is just an example of what this means. You're finding lots of information. It's your job to save your boss time by sending a sentence or a paragraph summary of what you found. That's a good, that's an example of what research in the workplace looks like. Okay, so what was hard? Again, these are recent grads. This is a big new change, changing from the life of a student to the life of a worker, lot of things are different. As far as this kind of task, research tasks, information seeking and using, the number one thing that they all mentioned was the increased sense of urgency in the workplace. So things are much quicker turnaround times. You might get a paper assignment in college and you have several weeks or even a month or two to finish it, and that's not really the kind of timeline that you're looking at in the workplace. It might be due tomorrow, something that your boss needs. Little structure or direction. So the task may be given to a new employee very quickly, briefly, without laying out a lot of guidelines like you might be used to in terms of your college assignments. And then finally, the grads talked also about the social side of workplace research. Highly contextual, meaning the answer and the problem is very much tied to the place where you're at. So the answer that you need to find is what you need for your particular workplace, as opposed to some kind of universal answer that would apply to every situation. And then the tasks themselves are almost always going to involve other people, either in a team setting or just contacting other people for information. So here's a graphic to kind of indicate the overlap between the two perspectives. I've told you about what the employer said, and I've told you about the other side, the recent grads. So a big overlap. And again, with a qualitative study, you've got a small sample. How do you know this really translates to be true for every workplace or true for every recent grad? You don't, and you can't say that. But you can look, when you do a study like this with two pieces and you see a few areas where it was duplicated or the same basic perspective was expressed from two different sides, then that strengthens your confidence in that finding. And for me, this sort of social side of research in the workplace is strengthened by the fact that the grads mentioned it and the employers mentioned it as well. So here's a representative quote. Grad said, "The biggest hurdle for me was getting used to talking to strangers." The employer said they need to stop looking at their computer so much for all the answers. And then here's something in which their perspectives sort of diverged. The grads look at the workplace and they see the fast pace, and the employers say, we need them to be more persistent. We need them to be more thorough. And doesn't that persistence and thoroughness require more time? And can those two things coexist? The fast pace? I don't know, but I think it's telling that they mentioned it. I think that the reason the employers might see the lack of persistence may be related to the fact that the grads see the paces so quickly they don't feel they can be persistent. That those two things I don't think are unconnected. And during the question and comment period, I'd be happy to hear anybody's thoughts about that. Okay, so for me, again, if I can just remind you again that one of the reasons I wanted to participate in this study is I really wanted to know how much of what I was teaching my students was useful, and I wanted to know how much transferred. So by the end of the study, I kind of had a sense of what academic information literacy is, but what is workplace information literacy? So here's my definition of what that means. What does it mean to be information literate in the workplace? Just like in academia, it has to do with synthesizing a variety of sources. This is a really big part of it. If you're information literate in the workplace, it means that you're able to critically evaluate your sources. It means being persistent. It means being open to continuous learning. And it's fundamentally social. And for me, thinking about the assignments I give, thinking about how I work with students, the last item was the area that I thought we could do the most work on as far as the teacher's side of things. More assignments in groups, or structuring more ways of working with students in groups. And also maybe asking students to start contacting experts before they've graduated. So here is the URL if anybody is interested in looking up more information about this study or any others. And now we have some time for questions. We have a microphone in the audience. I would just ask that if you have a question, please use the mic so that it's picked up for anybody who's watching. Any comments? I'm open to hearing any kind of question or comment. One right here. I'll give you my mic.
My name is Scott Travis. My question is, in the various states that you visit, what is the outcome in as far as the states?
Do you mean, are there differences between the states? That's an interesting question. This particular study, because the sample was so small, we had nowhere near every state. There was no analysis done by states. But I will tell you, there's a study we're doing right now that's much bigger. It's a quantitative study that is surveying, a big survey, I think about 1,500 student or recent graduates answered. That is something that we might do. It's not just workplace, it's called a lifelong learning study, and it's asking recent grads about their continued learning and their continued information seeking, not just for work, but also for their community and for their families, their personal life. And I think because the sample's so small here, it wouldn't really be fair to try to, you have one employer in New York, and you have one employer in California. Is it really fair to have them represent the whole state? So I'd have to say we didn't do that. But that's definitely something that might be happening with the big survey that's happening right now. It's,
In your states, what was the state that was like the most outcome?
you mean how many states, or what state was most represented? I don't know off the top of my head, but I will tell you regionally, we had a strong number of respondents from the West Coast and the Northeast. And we had some in Texas and some in, I believe it was either Illinois or Indiana, but the Southeast was not included in this particular study. So that's a great big region that you could, I mean, this is a great example of information literacy. You could critique this study and say, okay, fine, but where's the Southeast? And this is a qualitative study. It's a small sample. And so, you know, somebody else needs to do that study, or maybe we need to do better about it in our next study. So I can't tell you any one state, but like I said, the West Coast and the Northeast were most represented. Questions? Comments? There's one in the back, and then there's one. You'll be next.
You mentioned your background in newspapers. How do you use that in your career now?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. I really loved working for the newspaper. I worked for the Press Democrat, which was owned by the New York Times while I was there in Northern California for 13 years. How I use it, I could give you a better answer if I thought more about it, but I will say right off the top, my job as a news researcher meant that reporters and editors came into my office on a daily basis. I had to learn new things constantly. They might ask me a question for which I had no idea whatsoever, where to look or what the answer might be. And I got very good at turning those around really quickly and being kind of flexible in my thinking. And so not only does that help me just in general as a working person, but my job, until I became dean of the library, I was the instruction coordinator. I taught a class. I went and visited classes. I work with a lot of freshmen. And so my experience being constantly a novice, I think, is similar to how freshmen are. Freshmen, I think, are novices. And you're in a history class and you have to do a research paper, but you don't know anything about that topic. And so I think I could see things from their perspective and know that there are ways to get better and to ramp up and ways to be a novice. And it's, I think, a lot about finding context, you know, when you're a novice with a big new research question. That's the first thing that comes to mind. There's someone here in the back of the first section. Someone had their hand up over here.
You said if your boss is asking you to be persistent and thorough, why would they ask them that if they just got into the company in the first place?
You mean, so another way of thinking of it, is that really realistic to expect someone to be persistent?
Yeah.
Well, here's what I think. I think it's not realistic to expect a new employee to know the answer or to be able to turn it around quickly, but to have an attitude of keep trying, continuing to try, seems realistic to me. we had a great panel yesterday. I'm sure we'll have a great panel today of employers. And one of the employers said, I don't expect you to know everything about architecture, but I want you to care. And I think that persistence is tied to caring. And that and another employer said, the reason I've stuck with this job and I love my job is because I care about the patients that we serve. And I really want to do well by the patients. And so I think that if you see the task of the company as important and valuable, then you might fail. Like you might have a task and you don't get what you need, and then you try again. And I guess that it's more of an attitude, I think, and think it's tied to caring and believing that there's value in what the company is doing. So, but I wouldn't say that it's realistic to think that a new employee could be quick about it. Sometimes it's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take asking a lot of questions, probably. Thank you. Other questions or comments? Two in the back. Oh, sorry, yes.
Hi. I just wanted to know, with this being a research study, like, how do you find your participants? I know that you're targeting like the universities. Is it just for like the universities and colleges, or can individual students ask to participate in part of this study as well?
Thank you. That is a great question. As far as for this study, which was small, and the employer sample was a long, laborious process of getting them. How we found the employers was through our career services department. So I eventually got in the sample the Port of Los Angeles, an engineering company that hires our grads, and the FBI is a big employer. And Project Information Literacy has sort of liaison libraries. So because we've done a lot of studies, we have contacts at a lot of different campuses. And the PI, Allison Head, reached out to all the liaison librarians and asked for contacts in their career services offices, their alumni. And the alumni offices were how one way that we identified the recent grads. The recent grad sample was really hard to get. Now, the employers were hard, but we were successful. I feel very proud of that sample. It took a long time and a lot of work. The recent grads, it was hard to track them down. And I think it's the community college grads are even harder. They're not as cohesive a group. They're not as much on the same track as the four-year colleges. So think about, if you want to critique the study, this is a good exercise, and don't be shy about it, whether out loud or in your mind. Think about what kind of young person who's busy with their new job, they've already graduated a few years ago from their college, is going to respond to an email that asks if they would come to a focus group for an hour on a Saturday morning for a pretty small reward to talk about information literacy. Now, not many people would even respond to that email, much less go through and do it, and probably just hit that old delete button. So that grad sample is really hard to get, and so the students that we did get, or the recent students we did get, are probably students that were fairly successful, that were working in a job in their career, and so they felt really good about it. Maybe they enjoyed research, and so they were happy to talk about it on a Saturday morning. I don't know how typical that group is. I don't know how representative that group is. But if a student wanted to be involved in a PIL survey, the current study, that piece of it is done. But I'm trying to think how we recruited the large survey for lifelong learning. You know, I've been less involved with that study because I have the new responsibility as dean, so I don't know how she got that sample. There was one sample of students that she got through EasyBib, if anyone is familiar with the citation tool EasyBib. And I think that they sent a notice out, or they used their website to recruit volunteers. I guess just keep your eyes open. Librarians often know about these things. If you're a library person or a faculty member, Project Information Literacy does have a contact on their website. I can't tell you how a student could be involved, but if you're a faculty member that wants this institution, for example, to be involved, I would contact Dr. Head, Allison Head. And she's very open to adding new schools to the sample. So I think there's a hand in the back.
Okay. You say that we need to like you ask people's opinions as it pertains to research. How does that pertain to how we use the internet for research?
How are they different?
Yes.
So you're in a job and you're trying to decide if you should go in this new you're trying to help your boss decide. Maybe you're a new employee, you're trying to help your boss decide if you need to buy a product or go in a new direction, et cetera, or hire a vendor. I guess I see them as complementary. I mean, as the researcher in the newspaper, the question I would always ask myself is, who cares about this? Who would publish this? Like, for example, if I think the government might care, if I have a question about a particular industry, I'm always thinking, is there someone who regulates that industry that would be required to produce reports? So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to quickly answer your question. It's a really, really good question. I think that published information is about the past, and sometimes using a person's asking for their opinion, as you put it, or kind of their expert opinion, it might be about the past as well. A single person has knowledge. They have a certain kind of authority if they have expertise and authority. Something on the internet may be anonymous, so that's sort of thumbs down if it's anonymous. But if there's a source, it's all about that. If there's an author or an agency, it's about that agency's authority as well. So I'm just thinking off the top of my head, it's not a quick, easy question to answer. I think it comes down to authority. So it's always about evaluating the authority of the source. Does the person whose opinion you're asking, is it your little brother who has no real knowledge or authority? Or maybe your little brother does have knowledge or authority. What is their authority? Do they have experience? Do they have a degree? And then also on the internet, you can always look for who the author is. You can always look for what agency. Is this the agency that everybody asks? Is Joe down the hall the guy that everybody talks to? So lots of different ways, I think, of evaluating the authority, but I think that's what it does come down to. And I think that in the workplace, you have to use both. So I think there were some other hands. Yeah.
My question was, is this an ongoing study or has it concluded?
This particular one is done. But we got funding we got a little grant from a national agency to do this one, and that little grant paved the way for a big grant to do the current study, which is called the Lifelong Learning Study. It looks at learning in the workplace, but it also looks at learning, like I said, in your community for personal reasons, et cetera. Once you're done with college, you're still learning. How are people learning after they leave college? That study is ongoing. But I believe the survey part, which you could hypothetically have taken part of is done. Anyway, if you're curious about it, you can go onto the Project InfoLit website and learn more about it. And as far as I know, Allison Head has no intention of going away, and so there'll be another study in a couple of years. And if any administrator or faculty member at your school is interested in participating and they contact Dr. Head and she says yes, maybe at some point, maybe, I can't promise, at some point in the future, Forsyth would be part of a study like this. Hand, right there.
As far as information literacy in the workplace goes, what qualities should we take from today?
I would say the word persistence.
Persistence.
I really think that's a lot of it. And listening to, I'm still learning too, and listening to the employers yesterday, I would say that they might say that as well. If the employers want to talk about a lot of stuff, not just information literacy. There are a lot of things that they'll touch on. But if we were to force them to really focus on information literacy, I would guess that the habits of mind are the things that are hardest to teach. And so you have to develop them yourself, an openness to learning and a persistent attitude, not if it matters to not give up, or sometimes to know when it's time to give up. But I would say that's most important because many of the other things you can develop through practice, but it's hard for an employer to teach persistence. So that's my take on it. Another.
You said something about your sources. How did you deal with the large contents of information?
In general, yeah. I think everybody can relate to that. I spoke to someone yesterday who said that she went to 7 meetings one day at work. Imagine, just 7 meetings is a lot of information to deal with. And when she got back to her desk, she had 400 emails. So, for me, I just have to I have to stay on top of it or else I'm going to drown. I have to get really good at organizing. What do I need to deal with now? What can I deal with later? I have folders. I need to be ruthless about just deleting things that don't matter to me. I have places where I keep notes for ideas. My hardest thing is I hear about ideas that I want to try, but I can't deal with it now. And so I have a separate document where I keep those. So I think you just have to develop your own system that works for you. I don't know if we have time for any more questions. What's up? Okay, great. There's one way back in the corner.
Does this study consist of certain majors? And would you be willing to take this study abroad or to different countries?
Wow, what a great question. There was. I'm going to have to rely on my memory. I don't know if that's a good idea. I believe that I believe there was a heavier representation of liberal arts majors. But you know what? Why not? Rather than spread misinformation, I'll check that and I'll. Will you be around during the break? I'll look for you during the break if anybody else is here. I need to check that. It's a great question. The trouble, again, with this small sample is you don't want to, with such a small number of people involved, you don't want to overgeneralize. And if you have only 3 business majors and 5 engineering majors, is it really fair for 3 business majors to represent the entire country's worth of business majors? But we were a little heavy. I think that, and that's more a problem in the gathering of the sample, I think, than anything else. I don't think I could generalize about but PIL has done a lot of research on students, not as much on the grads. And a lot of the large studies of students will will talk about findings about certain majors. I don't know off the top of my head, but if you were really curious, you could look up those reports on our website. And then you had another piece to your question, international. I'll tell Allison that you suggested it. Then maybe I'll get to go somewhere. Are there other hands? There's one kind of near the back, striped shirt. No? Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for your interest. If you see gaps in this study and you see yourself continuing on in studying in college, maybe you can be part of some kind of study like this yourself, and maybe you can address some of the gaps. So let me look up his question.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break, everyone, and then we'll come back for the panel discussions. Thank you all so much for your attention and your thoughtful questions. And we'll come back. We're probably going to start at about 5 after 10 with the panel discussions. Thank you.
Yeah, they had good questions. They all want to be researchers. Yeah. That's so cool. Internet is connected. I don't know if the internet's connected, but let's see. It was yesterday. Let's see if I can. Maybe I.
Actually, we hit display mute for right now while she's
Judy still there?
Judy is still with us,
Okay,
yeah.
good. We were trying to see, I was trying to see whether or not I could get your president to come to our president will be there as well, at Biotech Place on March 30th for breakfast.
Okay.
To help sort of spirit Salem into the Heart Walk, which is going to be in the fall at
Okay.
Tanglewood. And so I'm just looking for somebody to contact that I could perhaps get that extension, that invitation extended to.
All right.
Yeah. You want my card?
Here, I tell you what, I can give you the person to contact to get in touch
That'd be
with
great. Oh, perfect. That's
Lorraine.
even better. Yeah.
This is her right-hand woman.
And by the way, everybody that works for me is a Salem graduate, including my wife, and my daughter went there too.
I'm pretty sure you and I met several
Did
years
we?
ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have I think you had Micah Welsh as a student at one time?
Yes, I did
Yeah,
indeed.
Micah's right hand.
Really?
And then Mona Kofer is my left hand.
Oh wow.
Do you remember Mona Kofer?
What's her last name?
Kofer.
It sounds so familiar, but I'm not putting a face to it.
Right. She took her degree later in life. She first graduated from here, and then she graduated from UMass. And so did Micah.
Yes.
And now I have another one there, Mary Flournoy.
Oh yeah, wow.
Yeah. I think she's probably in your class, right?
I did not teach Mary.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. So Mary's with us right now.
All right. So there's Lorraine.
Oh, thanks. Terrific.
Right-hand woman.
Thank you very much.
The keeper of the calendar.
Yeah, the calendar.
Hi. Oh my gosh, what are you doing? No, do you? Oh, good for you. It's good to see you.
Will call me to do the bringing of the news, and I told him, I said, it just sounds like so. I'd love to. I did a few years ago. I had like my dates already lined up. So I feel kind of bad, but can help in other ways.
Strange seating arrangement with this sitting right up in front.
My thing is like, I know there are people in the back. I can barely see them because I have astigmatism, so I use my glasses to reference, but then I can't read unless I have my glasses on. Most people, they start losing. My reading is actually really, really good with glasses, which is really strange. But I can make out people in the back row, but I can't make out their fine features.
All right, thank you.
Good morning. Okay, how many of you were here for the keynote? Okay, so we have some folks still in. Okay. Well, for those of you that weren't here, a couple housekeeping notes to get started. Please turn your cell phones off. And if you do have to slip out, and I'll give this as a warning for everyone, Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have different schedules all over campus. So there will be some people coming in and some people going out. So as you're doing that, try to be quiet and courteous if you have to. By the way, my name is Susan Emery. I'm the Quality Enhancement Plan Director here at Forsyth Tech. And hopefully you all know about our Quality Enhancement Plan focused on information literacy skills. We're focused on building information literacy skills in our students to help you become successful here at Forsyth Tech, as well as in your future educational pursuits and in the workplace. So hopefully today's panel discussion will give you some insight to the employer's perspective on what it takes to be successful and what skills you need. I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to our Director of Admissions, Jean Groom, to officially introduce our panelists.
We're excited to have you all here today. I'm not sure we understood when we started this project exactly where it was going to grow and where it was going to go. So today's an exciting day because we're making the connection now from being a student to being a future employee. So I hope you find this useful and helpful to you. The first person I'm going to introduce is our keynote speaker, who has also agreed to moderate our panel today. So for those of you who heard this in the earlier session, you can recite along with me. Michele Van Hoeck was recently promoted to the position of Dean of the Library at California State University, Maritime. While her career began as a news researcher, for the past 5 years, Van Hoeck has coordinated the Information Fluency Program at the college, as well as contributing heavily as a research associate in Project Information Literacy, which is a national study about early adults' information-seeking behaviors and competencies at the University of Washington's Information School. Since 2011, Van Hoeck has published multiple information literacy-related papers and has traveled the country presenting at national conferences as a content specialist in the field of information literacy. She currently serves on the assessment committee for the Cal Maritime Council of Library Deans and uses her expertise as an official reviewer for the Journal of Information Literacy. She's also responsible for the sunshine we got yesterday and the warm weather, but you can take the rain back home with you. All right, going down our panelists, our first panelist is Annette Peak. Annette is the manager of clinical radiology with Novant Health at both Kernersville and Forsyth Medical Centers, where she oversees the CT, MRI, sonography, and nuclear medicine departments. Peak participates in multiple committees at both facilities, including joint practice, operational improvement, and policy review. Starting her educational path at Forsyth Tech Community College, she is currently pursuing a master's in health administration at Pfeiffer University. As a registered technologist in radiology with the American Registry of Radiologic Technicians and an expert in her field, she now sits on the Forsyth Tech Advisory Board for the radiology program. Jill Atherton is our next speaker. She is the Vice President of Economic Community Development with the Winston-Salem Chamber of Commerce. A graduate of Appalachian State University and Wake Forest University, Atherton has 15 years working in economic development in our area. She is active in the community, volunteering much of her times with groups such as Leadership Winston-Salem, Women Who Care, and Clemens United Methodist Church. Next up, we have Russ Reed. Russ has worked in the bioscience industry for over 35 years. Formerly an executive with the Burroughs Wellcome and Glaxo Wellcome companies, he was heavily involved with the commercial development of antivirals like AZT and 3TC, which are mainstay treatments for the HIV illness. For the last 10 years, he has led an effort called the National Center for the Biotechnology Workforce, which is based in Winston-Salem and is now a part of North Carolina's Biotech and Forsyth Technical Community College. The NCBW focuses on building best practices, partnerships with the National Science Foundation, the NSF, and the USDOL, and the Manufacturing Institute. Russ is currently the principal investigator for the NSF ATE project grant named the Biosciences Industrial Fellowship Program, in addition to many other committees to which he contributes his time and expertise. Next, we have Paula Grafton Young. She is an associate professor of mathematics at Salem College in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. After completing her PhD in mathematics at the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville, Young began her teaching career at Salem College in 1993. While teaching all levels of mathematics to Salem students and participating and leading numerous committees over the years, she has also found time to co-author the textbook Finite Mathematics, an Applied Approach, 3rd edition, and write several supplemental pieces to complement text written by other experts in the field. Dr. Young was named Salem Distinguished Professor from 2002 to 2007 and currently serves as the Director of the Center for Teaching Excellence and Innovation at Salem College, the Chair of Tenure and Promotion Committee, and manages the Quest Project, which offers peer tutoring and provides resources to students to help develop quantitative, scientific, and technological skills. And finally, our last panelist, Chris Langham. Chris is the battalion chief with the Winston-Salem Fire Department and formerly the program coordinator at Forsyth Tech for the fire protection and emergency management programs. Chris has recently concluded a 2-year term on the Emergency Management Advisory Council in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where the committee advises the city and county officials on civil preparedness topics, gives input on the annual budget, and recommends individuals to fill vacancies on the council. Please join me in welcoming our panel today, and I hope you find it very informative.
Hello again. Okay, so I'm in charge of asking the initial questions, but there should be time at the end for many more questions, I think, from the audience. So, no, I think I will go back to this one. Okay, so for the employer panel, the session is about information literacy, and if I could just, sort of reframe that as research skills. Like, so if information literacy in the workplace is about finding and using information to solve problems, make decisions, given that definition, what would you say in your industry or your company are the top 3 research skills that are crucial for success in your business? And, you can break it down not just to finding and using, but the question asking stage, the searching stage, different types of tools that are needed for your company, the evaluating stage, and then the using stage, so synthesizing, summarizing, all those pieces making up research in the workplace. Any of those in particular, any 3, do you think are crucial for success? And anyone grab a mic as you think of an answer.
I can go first.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the most important things that you have to know is networking and know who your tools are. It's very easy in this age to go ahead and just pull up Wikipedia, which is an easy way of looking up things that's not always very reliable. And you want to be able to know your resources in your field. Also, as an employer, when I give an assignment or request data to be harvested, you're only going to make me as good as the research that you do. So it's very important that you go out there and you tap all your resources. You tap the resources of networking with Joe in the office next door. You find those subject matter experts that are out there. And then at the very beginning and throughout, ask questions, ask clarifying questions to make sure that I communicated clearly with what is expected of you.
Thank you. So asking clarifying questions, networking, and using a variety of sources, it sounds like, are your 3. Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, hi. Well, good morning, everybody. And everybody's wide awake and looks good, and, and that's really nice, and the weather's changing. Isn't that great? So in our field, obviously research. We're biotech, and biotech means medicines. It means agricultural products and fueling products. So it's really, really important to do the research right. You have to do it correctly. So even if you are doing some literacy type of research, what you report back has to be accurate. And so, you'd want to triangulate your resources. You'd want to find as multiple sources as you could to verify what you were looking up online and other sources, and bounce that off the supervisor or the people that you're working with or the team, and bring back to the team something that is very accurate as it can be. We're talking about research protocols where things are defined in very specific terms. And so what you're bringing back, you're bringing something back that maybe backs a finding or something. So I would say accuracy.
Accuracy, and you used a good word I want to reemphasize, triangulate. That's a word that journalists use when you're writing a story for a newspaper. You get more than one person's opinion. Also, qualitative studies, we triangulated by talking to both employers and the employees. So triangulate is a great approach to research.
I think one of the things that, at least at the college level, and what I do as a mathematician that's important, is knowing the difference between a primary resource and a secondary or even tertiary resource. Most students think that a textbook has got everything in it that's right. When I wrote my textbook a long time ago, the publisher said it can't be 80% different from any, it can't be more than 20% different from any other textbook with the same title. And I thought that was strange. But what happens is things that get in textbooks usually originated from like a textbook author that wrote something that may or may not have been true, and it gets sort of passed down through the generations of the books. Textbooks are not a primary source. You need to try to figure out, sleuth back to the origins of something, and you do that through the primary resources, through an academic search, through going to actual journal articles and things like that, so that you can track something down to its origin rather than just assuming that it's a textbook or a professor's website that it must be true.
Hello, how's everybody doing? You look good. Much of what we do, being in a governmental organization, we're providing research to the elected officials to get funding for whatever we're trying to move forward with. And in many cases, that's a very short time frame to turn that information around. So we need good researchers that can gather all that information. I think you hit the nail on the head in your keynote that the research is not always a tangible academic resource. We're going to have to go out to those individuals, especially in our world of the fire service and the emergency services. I'm going to say only in about the last 10 to 15 years have we really grabbed onto the world of academia, and our profession has grown in that. So a lot of it is reaching out to those other partners in our industry. And for the elected officials, they're going to ask us a lot, especially locally. What are the other cities doing? What is Charlotte doing? What is Greensboro and Raleigh? So we have to get that piece from the individuals themselves.
So it may not exist in print. You've got to know the right person to contact for best practices in another place.
That is a huge buzzword for our industry, the accreditation process that we go through, which is a lot of research and planning, is best practices. What is our industry doing in best practices, and finding that information. And it is in print somewhere, but it's not where you're necessarily going to be able to grab it on Google or go to the library.
It's on someone's shelf in their office.
Right.
It's not on the web, and it's not published in it's on a book in a library.
Exactly.
Thank you. I think we have one more person.
Good morning. At the Chamber of Commerce, we do a lot of research for businesses that call us and they ask for specific information. And we have an entire department that is sole job is to find out things that help businesses grow. And we get a lot of crazy questions, including we've been asked how many squirrels there are in Forsyth County and things like that. And we actually got an answer for that person, if you're wondering. So in our case, a lot of it is just critical thinking and out of the box. I mean, you're not going to be able to Google a lot of the things that they're asking for. And so how do you find out something that you know is critical for the future of that business, but it's not going to be easy to find? So I think you have to be able to look beyond the obvious in some cases and really dig in and call a bunch of people. And sometimes it's an opinion as opposed to a fact, but we give them that information also. But we're really there to try and pull together the best information possible. We pay for a lot of great databases, but those aren't always accurate either. I mean, you have databases that list company names, but the minute they're published, that information is obsolete. So when you give somebody a list like that, you have to give it to them with a caveat that no matter where you get this list, it's not 100% accurate. So we really look for people in that position and everywhere in our organization that can think outside the box and really think, is this really what somebody would benefit from?
That's, yeah, it's hard to, what do you call that? That ability to communicate, I guess, to qualify that, you know, that this is not 100%, you know, the answer, but the best I can give you is 90%, that sort of thing. Okay, great. Those are really great examples. So now that we've kind of established what workplace information literacy is, and we've got a lot of examples, what would you say are the information literacy skills you find yourself teaching students or new employees most often? Where are you bringing them up to speed? What areas of research?
I'm going to say that I don't know if the right word is justify your resources, but make sure that it's not just something, information that's been reached out there and grabbed. A lot of times, especially, again, I'm going to go back to the elected officials, used to, a fire chief could show up at a budget meeting and say, these are the 5 to 10 things I'm looking to get, and basically they went off of the fire chief's word. And now, typically they're wanting that at a minimum of 30 to 60 days in advance. They can mull over it. They kind of go back and justify our research. So it's not something that we can simply say, well, because everybody else is doing it. And once we put that into a document, we're actually giving those sources almost like a bibliography or what have you.
So documenting your sources maybe is what you would call it?
Absolutely. And the fire service, again, we're kind of, especially people coming up through the ranks, they may not have had that strong research background, and that's what we're having to kind of teach on the back end.
A little bit more rigorous, a little more methodical than it used to be.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Good example.
So I'll take a stab at it. So, you know, what I would think would be a very important skill for people to learn is to get away from the computer, as you said this morning, and work in a group and get other people's opinions and try to come up with a best guess scenario. I think that that's a skill that you can learn. It's a people skill. And what we find in our industry a lot is that people will come out of laboratory environment with really, really good hard skills, and that's what we excel at here, especially at Foresight Tech. But they don't necessarily have that ability to mix well with other colleagues at work and be able to actually work as a team. And so I would say those team building skills are really important, but at the same time not to be afraid to take your preliminary findings to folks and discuss it with them and get their opinions. So that would be my take on it.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else want to comment on skills you find yourself teaching new employees or recent graduates most often in terms of research?
I'll jump.
Okay.
I think presenting the ideas, I think it bounces off of both of what these guys were talking about. You know, it's one thing to find it, one thing to analyze it, criticize it, understand it, and then to relay that information to someone else in terms that they can understand is a very important information literacy skill. It's about, you know, transmitting what you've learned as well. It goes with the group work, working with others, having the people skills, plus going in and finding the information. If you can't explain it to somebody else, you can't do it in words that they understand, then it's not very helpful information to have.
If I can pick up on one piece of what you said, because it came up in yesterday's panel as well, that it really, in terms your audience will understand. Yes. Can you either give an example or elaborate a little on the idea that there may be one way to explain it for one audience and another way to explain it for another audience, and that kind of audience awareness?
Sure. So if a student writes a paper for me, she's writing it to me, and I'm the professor, and therefore she thinks that I'm going to understand everything, which I hope I do. But when the student has to turn around and present it to a group of her peers, or to a general audience, that's taking the information to a whole different level. It's not writing to the mathematician or writing to the biology professor or writing to the history professor. It's explaining it to the art history major or to the auto mechanics or to somebody else that's going to be taking that information and using it for another purpose.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on audience awareness? That was a big one on yesterday's panel.
It is a big one. When I translate information and communicate it across from data that I harvest or information that you provide me, I have to think about who my audience is. So it could be my director, it could be the board of directors for the hospital. And based on who that is, it's going to have certain presentation formats. So it's important that I communicate that with you when you're harvesting things and bringing it to me, that you know who your audience is.
Thank you. Okay. Sort of a different slice on a similar question. What are some skill gaps that you see, or how about we put it this way? What surprises you most when you have a new employee or new employees? What surprises you most about what they're unfamiliar with in this realm of research, communication, finding, and using information? Any surprises? Things you thought, I would have thought that they would know this?
Presentation. I am consistently surprised with presentation. I think that there's a lot of slang out there that's used in communication, and when it comes over to me, I still see improper grammar, slang being used, and then I've got to clean that up to be able to use the information that was given to me, and I'm consistently surprised with that.
Is this a verbal presentation or a written presentation?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other surprises?
Agreed.
Just a second.
Yeah. Second.
So, you know, I've just been down at a conference where we had 800 people attending for the life sciences in North Carolina, and I went and spoke to a couple of employers, and it actually had some of our people as interns, and I asked them, well, how did it fare? You know, how did they do, and so forth and so on. And you know, the comment came back was, I could see on the look, by the look of one of the employers' faces, that things didn't go too well. And so I said, you know, look, you know, let's be open about this. What's the issue? Well, the person, you know, went in and decided in a research lab to design their own carbon nanofilter for their cigarette. Well, that was a pretty ingenious thing to do, but it wasn't within the scope of work that that person was given. And second of all, then they went and proceeded to use the carbon filter that they had discovered in their own cigarette. And the employer was really quite taken aback, because everything we do is protocol, and everything we do is regulated, and everything we do is watched by the FDA. And so when you take it upon yourself to be a little too creative, a little too inventive, you can actually be doing a lot of damage for the company. So it's, you know, it's really important to be to be able to follow directions and follow the protocol and stay within, you know, what the guidelines are that you have. Now, it's good to have a great idea, and in fact that's how companies are built and innovate, but you've got to take that idea to your leadership. And so I think that, you know, those of you who are going out into the job space, you know, your employer has a hierarchy, and they have set rules, and depending on what kind of environment you're in, you've got to get very familiar with what it is that are the expectations. Not to say that you can't be creative, not to say that you can't be thinking, because you should be. That's what you're hired to do. But you know, in our line of business, one-sided error could cost the company its future, and also could cause huge damage to a batch of a medicine or so forth. So you've got to be meticulous, you've got to be careful, and you've got to make sure that you're following directions.
It seems like I actually see a commonality between your comment and the other about sort of having to do with level of formality. That, you know, that in the workplace has a certain expectation about formality in communication, and also formality in action, or awareness of the consequences, I guess. Yeah. Any other comments?
Yeah, I think that along with information literacy and going out and finding stuff, a lot of people don't realize how much can be found out about you. We were talking about that in the green room. Having someone show up at a conference and present something that the employer was shocked about is really, really bad. Having the employer find out that you've been moaning and groaning about your job on Facebook or Twitter or whatever is also bad. Prior to getting that job, you want to make sure that the information that's out there that's easily accessible about you, and believe me, it's a lot more easily accessible than you think, control your own information flow. And make sure that the only information that you've got out there is information that is going to be helpful to you and not hurtful to whomever you represent.
Okay, some surprises I've heard from other people as well. I mean, these are this is a common set of surprises.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Do you have any suggestions for how to foster the transfer of academic research skills to those needed in your industry? So some awareness probably of what's being taught in the academic environment, I assume, especially at Forsyth, and how any advice or suggestions for transferring those academic skills?
Why is everybody looking at me?
I think that, speaking with my colleagues who run the biotech program here, I think they do an incredible job of mirroring what industry expectations are. We know that because where I might have one odd case where somebody didn't work out as an intern or something, we have absolutely the opposite. We have dozens and dozens of people who have had extraordinary experiences. So I think that what the college does extremely well is mirror what the expectation is of the employee. I mean, we have advisory committees where we get inputs, so we steer the curriculum as well as we can to make it real life, practical, and so forth. At the same time, speaking for my colleagues there that do that, they do a nice job of actually sitting down with the employers and understanding their expectations of people who might go in and do an internship, and then screen them with the employer to make sure the employer feels comfortable with the person that's going in. And when they come back from their experience, they have to do a research. They have to report on it. So, if they've done something that is that they've learned something or they've experienced something, they bring it back and share it with the rest of the group. So it's sharing, which is really important. So everybody learns in the process. So, from what I've seen, it's this sort of this method or this methodology of being able to interact with employers, understand their needs, and on our side, it tends to be very research oriented. So our students have to have a good idea of what research is all about.
So just even understanding the research process. Right. Any other comments?
The point being on how to foster the transfer of your academic skills to the real world. The point is you have to ask those clarifying questions. So you're doing a lot of stuff right now in school that you may never see again, but you're also doing a lot of things in school that you're going to bring forward in the workplace and have value in the workplace. And what that means is when you come on board, ask those clarifying questions. As an employer, I don't want to hear the same questions over and over again. So however you retain the answers to those questions and build upon that during your employment is what's important to me.
One thing I would say is, as far as the transfer, in our organization, we're a pretty small group and we're a nonprofit, and we don't have a lot of people who are there to do supervision. I mean, when you get a position with us, you're expected to take that and run with it, and whether you know what you're doing or not, you at least need to try and go out there and do the best you can, even if you're not 100% sure. And sometimes people are afraid to try something and afraid it might not work. And if it doesn't work, that's okay, but I'd rather have someone working for me that gave it a lot of effort, even if the conclusions they came up with were not exactly 100%, than someone who just half tried. I mean, I really would rather in our organization, we're not, it's not so strict that we have to be 100% on the right answer, but we want some creative thinking, and we want someone who's willing to say, well, how do I figure that out on my own? And how can I do it without, ask other people and get their opinions as well.
So that balance between persisting independently and also within the team.
Kind of to touch on that, I think the speed of organizing all of that information, I think one of the biggest surprises in our industry, and you mentioned that your college has a lot of grads going to like the FBI, and we're the type industry where you're going to immediately have to go back into school. Our graduates out of our schools come out with 4 state certifications, and that's a very intensive 26-week school of sometimes a test every day. Sometimes by the end of the week they've taken 7 or 8 tests, and it's just a quick flow of information, and being able to grab that information quickly, kind of catalog it for yourself, and you're just constantly flowing with that. Probably about 5 years ago, we transitioned putting computers in the classroom for our students, which was a kind of an unheard of thing when you talk about firefighters, but it was because we were throwing so much information at them so quickly, and being able to process that and basically to pass those certifications.
Yeah, I like the word you use, which I tend to think of as a librarian word, but we all can do it in our work lives as catalog. That when you're faced with a massive amount or a lot that you can't hold in your mind all at one time, that you need your own system for keeping track and organizing. Thank you. I'd like to veer off the script a little, because you've reminded me of the big change that's happened in the last, let's say, 10 years as far as mobile technology, and the fact that there are many jobs that didn't used to be computer-based, jobs that people thought of, like firefighting maybe, like police work, as being somewhat independent of a desk and a computer or technology. And now I understand from a panelist yesterday that police cars have mobile technology, pretty advanced mobile technology in the cars. Does anyone want to comment on that shift in your workplace and how it might impact the kind of skills that students need coming in? The impact of mobile tech?
I've been an X-ray tech for over 2 decades, and I've seen X-ray go from film, where you had to dip it into chemistry, to completely digital. And we've had to learn the software that goes along with that. And that was a culture change for me. We now go from patient charts, where you have the charts that travel along with the patient, to the EMR, electronic medical record. That's something else. You've got to have your basic computer skills to learn that software.
Any other mobile technology impacts anyone wants to comment on? For good or ill?
Oh, ill. Okay, I got ill.
So this is from a personal perspective. I would say 7 years ago, well, I know it exactly. 7 years ago, I unfortunately had a stroke. And I was up in Baptist Hospital, which is one of our big hospitals here. And my neurologist pulled up his laptop when I was exiting the hospital and showed me a brain scan. I thought it was, unbelievable that he would be able to do that. And he didn't really have the soft skills that I was looking for, because he said if the stroke had been a millimeter closer to that particular part of my brain, that I would be an organ donor. But here I am today, and I feel good, and everything's great. But the point I wanted to make really was that the digitalization, to say that what you said is so important. And in what we do, there's a clinical aspect of testing drugs and so forth that's really important, called clinical research. I, for one, was one of those people that managed studies and so forth. And all our taking in of data now is changing. It's becoming very, very mobile oriented, and it goes right into the main data bank. And so therefore, these big studies that we have used to be very, very paper oriented, and they're very digital oriented now. So it's really exciting. It's really interesting. But on the same hand, you're collecting the data, you're getting the data, but you still have to have the rigor, you still have to have the follow-ups, and you still have to have the evaluations. So although it might look easy and it might look very flexible, which it is, it still has to go through the rigor.
And humans are still interpreting, humans are still exerting their judgment on that data.
Exactly.
The speed of mobile technology for us, just the brass tacks of it, has improved our ability to save lives quickly. The speed that we can get that information translates into how we're able to process that information and use it. Everything from we receive our dispatches, as you mentioned, on the mobile computer, we're able to tap into it. We can get schematics of a building. We are the hazardous materials response for the entire county. That comes with a humongous research piece that used to be the back of a response vehicle where we had a library of books, is now readily available via a laptop or an iPad, that kind of thing, and be able to gather all that information to figure out what's in those labs at Forsyth Tech, how the chemicals are potentially reacting together, to gather that so we can create those hot and cold zones and get people to safety, how much treatment is required, that kind of thing. And so it's made a tremendous difference. And if you're not, that's kind of that piece where it goes back to the research of researching that technology for us, because it comes with a pretty large price tag. You mentioned earlier that we buy a lot of software, but we have to kind of be able to interpret that. Well, that research piece of staying on the cuff of what the technology is out there and being able to present it to our elected officials of why it's so important for the community for us to have this information.
Would you say, following up on that, would you say that the digitization of information and spread of mobile technology in your fields has caused the need for more training than there used to be? So if things are changing quickly, do employees have to, take new classes for some new software more regularly, would you say? Heads nodding. I see several heads nodding. Okay. That's it. I guess that was an easy one. Yeah. I have a question about data sources. We kind of started talking about that just now. And I assume that each of you, or at least most of you, will have a different answer to this question. This is not going to be a one right answer question, but it will depend on the industry and on the field. What are the most relevant data sources for your area? And so I often think of databases. As a librarian, I buy and I teach databases, but a data source may be a website, or it could be an agency, I guess, if you want to think of a data source that way, although I tend to think of it as digital. So just sort of practically speaking, what are the top ones for your industry?
For radiological services, it's the ACR, the American College of Radiology, is the one that we reference to for best practices.
So the professional organization keeps a set of best practices. Okay. And any medical databases that your people need to check?
Not so much in imaging. Our nursing staff uses Micromedics and a lot of those databases for allergy reconciliations, medication reconciliations. So nursing does a lot.
Nursing, heavier use of the databases. Okay. But best practices is your go-to place. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else want to talk about data sources?
Library.
On this campus, you teach at Salem.
That's right.
Okay.
Librarians are phenomenal resources. Libraries contain phenomenal resources. At Salem and at Forsyth Tech, I'm sure we have subscriptions to large amounts of databases on many, many different subjects. The librarians are constantly trying to make sure that we have up-to-date resources and access to those things. Never, ever, ever discount a library.
And we are geared towards the novice. We're not in the workplace. They might assume certain things. The library on a college campus is supposed to be and almost always is geared towards the learner.
Mm-hmm. So in our field, highly regulated. So the FDA is a primary source. It's great information if you go to the FDA.gov website. Also, the NIH, National Institutes of Health, very important for us. So. Again, a good place to go. And our own funder, which is National Science Foundation, has great databases, a lot of information up there, public money really well used. And I've just put in a plug for the Advanced Technological Education Group. That's who funds us, NSF. Go there, look at their websites. They have so many technologies, jobs and technologies that they invest in
that it's a terrific source. I would say the library is a great source for folks that are interested in starting a business. And in Winston-Salem, we have a tremendous library. It's also great for people who are looking for jobs. When you get to the point where you're job searching, our downtown library, which is now in process, it'll be finished in a couple of years, but Kathleen Wheelis, who works for them, is a wonderful resource. She has a temporary office right now, but anytime someone comes to us and they're trying to start a business, they have to do a lot of research for their business plan. And so we often refer to them as a great resource. And again, for job seekers, you can go in and find information out about local companies, what the kinds of employees they're looking for. You can find help with resumes. I mean, it's just a tremendous resource people don't always think about.
I think that's true. I hear that a lot in the public library world. It's not my world, but I interact with them. And small businesses, people job hunting, that's a big mission of the public library, is to help those folks.
A lot of our databases overlap. OSHA, we're a very regulated industry. The National Fire Protection Association, along with the National Fire Academy. And a lot of people don't realize after the events of 9/11, under a presidential proclamation, Department of Homeland Security, all of that got put under one umbrella. So when we go through the National Fire Academy and the Department of Homeland Security, it's kind of that information sharing database that we're able to go out and grab a lot of our information.
Thank you. I'm going to throw out a Google search trick. When I was a newspaper reporter and I didn't know where to find what I needed, but I suspected it was in some government agency database, but I just didn't know which one. This is a trick I teach my students a lot, because on the web, a sort of way to quality filter, to filter the good from the bad, is sometimes to limit your search to a .gov. And Google Advanced, if you dig down, you can find the advanced search page. You can do whatever search you were doing before, but just tell Google, only bring me back information from the .gov websites. There's a URL field, and that immediately throws out a lot of junk. And then I would kind of scan down, and I don't necessarily jump into the first few links. I look, who are the players, like in the fire field or whatever question I'm dealing with. Who are the people that are publishing the most reports on this particular topic? And chances are it's an agency that's, typically very reliable source of information. If you're doing a research project, that's a savvier way to use Google. Since I mention it, since several people mentioned the agencies that regulate their organization or their industry. Should we open it up to questions from the audience? We've got 5 employers here, 5 business people that are ready to take your questions. Just raise your hand and wait for the mic. Back in the back there.
Good morning. My name is Ed Dawkins, and this question is directed to Russ. Could you tell me if there are any scholarships available at biotech, and for anyone that's pursuing employment with biotech, and if so, what are the requirements for them?
So Ed, I think are you talking to have scholarships once you leave Foresight Tech or getting into Foresight Tech?
Well, once I leave Foresight Tech.
Okay. Oh, so the answer is sure, there are. And are you thinking of going into a 4-year college or pursuing your education into a 4-year college?
Is that one of the requirements?
Well, no, it's the requirement. If you want to have a job, if you're thinking more of a job, you can go directly with the proper training, you can go directly into the industry right from Foresight Tech. We've had many successful people do that. So you really wouldn't need a scholarship for that. The company will hire you. But if you're thinking of pursuing your education beyond Foresight Tech and you'd like to go to one of the universities and finish off your 4-year degree, there are scholarships available for sure in biotech. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I see a few hands. There's one in the front of the back section.
If you look at the demographics of Foresight Tech and a lot of community colleges, you'll see that the age range is from 17, 18 years old all the way up to 50s and 60s. And I've had students who have changed careers midlife and or got downsized at their job and had to start a new career all over again. What is some advice that you could give for, I won't say older, the more mature person that's out there looking for a job as far as your company goes? I know like firefighting, there's probably an age ceiling maybe. I'm not sure. You could clarify that. But what is some advice you could give to a person who's starting a career midstream and advice that you could give them as far as your companies are concerned?
Okay. So we've had many people come back that have been laid off from furniture, textiles, existing industries, tobacco, and they've been retrained. You know, we don't ask them their age. We don't know their age, but you know, you can probably figure it out. And they've been rapidly employed, and they've gone on to do great jobs because companies love the fact that they're more mature and that they've gone through all that process of, you know, kicking around the dirt and the cars and all that sort of stuff. And so by the time that they come back in and they've been retrained, they just make excellent employees by and large. And so we've actually seen great success stories. I can think of one, I won't name him, but you know, he's one of our star graduates from Forsyth who came in, definitely had been laid off 4 times, came into biotech, has done extremely well, works at a downtown research company in the biotech space, and now is an actual professor here, an adjunct in Forsyth Tech, and went on beyond his coming back and shaping up his hard skills in biotech and getting his associates. He had already had an undergraduate in science from many, many years back, and then he went on to do a master's in bioethics at Wake Forest. So you know, we've seen a number of people perform like that, and you know, age was not a factor.
Any clarification on the firefighting age ceiling?
We do not have an age ceiling. Basically, federal law, we can't discriminate against age. I know Winston-Salem Police Department a few years back hired someone, went through their recruit school that was in their 60s. But to expand on that, after 2008, the economy downturn, we had over 1,000 applicants for about a 3-year period that was applying to the fire department. And we did see an increase in age, people who had either been downsized, and kind of expand on something you mentioned in your keynote of what make you stand out. You know, if we're looking at 1,000 applicants, and typically we have about a 2-month window to downsize that into a hiring pool that can be anywhere from 18 to 30, you know, that's a daunting task. So what's going to make that person that's applying stand out? And I was on an interview panel one time, and we had an individual who had graduated from one of our state 4-year institutions, had played football for 4 years, had maintained, it was almost a 4.0 GPA. We had all that in his interview packet. And I said, well, from your education, had a business administration major, you know, what do you think you can bring from your 4 years of college that's going to help you with the fire department? And we took everything we had not to start laughing. He said, well, and this is we hired him. He is just a very intelligent individual. We're watching him rise through the ranks. This was about 4 years ago. And he had so much to offer, and he had such a background in business administration. And his answer was, well, I played 4 years of football. And it was that mindset of the fire service being that blue-collar stigma of, hey, I'm a team player, I'm a hard worker, I'm an athlete. And I know that's what he was framing out in his mind, but, you know, 50 of our applicants had played football in college, you know. So it's what is really going to make the applicants stand out, and describing your research abilities and the ability to gather information out there, and the things that you've done in your community that you've taken your education to do. You know, it's something that's going to make you stand out, and we have that many applicants is huge.
Thank you. Someone else?
I would advise any age, whether it's a high school graduate or somebody who's changing careers, to do their research to find out what is entailed, especially in the healthcare industry. Healthcare is not just moving boxes and working with boxes. It's working with people and family members and the sick and the suffering. And you have to make sure that you know that that's what's going into it. When you research, a lot of people are looking at the salary range. They're looking at what's paying in the industry, in the state. Go beyond that. Tap into people that you know who are nurses or healthcare workers. Find out what the job entails so that you can be successful in that role.
Good advice. The research starts with researching the job and the industry. Yeah, both people and print sources. Any other questions from the audience? There's a couple hands in the back. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. One in the front. And we'll get you guys in the back next.
Hello. My name is Shamir Moody, and there's been a lot of talk about research and finding accurate research. My question basically is, how would you tell someone to go out there to find the accurate research when you were stating that even the primary, secondary, and tertiary sources, such as our textbooks and some of the websites and web pages, might not be accurate? What advice could you give us as students who are researching to try to find like employment and stuff to be able to decipher and filter out the junk from the good?
Since I made the comment about secondary and tertiary, I guess I'll start. It's a puzzle. It's a sleuth. It's a maze to follow. I mean, you find something where they quote someone. Now you go and you look for that person where they quoted it. And then you look at where it's published. You read a newspaper article, especially an online newspaper article, because we have so few print newspapers anymore. Very often they're recycled from other news reports. And so if it says, according to this particular newspaper, okay, now go back to that one and read what that one said. And then what did the person actually say in that article? Were they quoted from there, from some other source? Sometimes it's just backtracking till you find the original source. And it's a lot of fun, actually, whenever you find out that, it's like the phone game you play when you're in kindergarten. By the time you get around the circle, it is not what was first said. And it's fun to track those things down, but then you get back to that original primary source and you realize that, George Washington never said this. This is what George Washington said, or whatever. And it gives you a feeling of power to finally understand, oh my gosh, this is really what happened. It wasn't what got translated over and over again. So it's backtracking, it's sleuthing, it's solving a puzzle.
Hopefully also your employer is going to guide you as a new graduate. They're going to make those recommendations to say, what's our Charlotte Market partners doing for their practice? What are our competitors doing? Check with Baptist, check with Cone, see what they're doing. When you're researching policies and procedures, you've got to take in a variety of tools to gather that information.
On a humorous note, back when I was in large pharmaceuticals, we used to publish our data, and we'd have the development of a major drug like AZT for HIV. And so, to see a couple of authors go at each other because they misquoted the paper, and then their paper was published, but the editorial board didn't catch it, it's actually quite comical, to see them going at each other. And so, you as a young person coming in, if you have that tenacity and that persistence, and you're working as a researcher for somebody, they will pay attention to you, because if you're doing, your primary research or your discovery research really well, and you've gone back to the original source, and you can show, because those people, they don't have all the time in the world. That's why they've hired you, and so you save them face. There's nothing more embarrassing than having a paper published where in fact you've misquoted somebody, or you haven't taken the original research and interpreted it correctly.
And there's always the triangulation word, variety of sources, multiple sources, going back to the original source, and knowing that there may be tasks that take a lot of time, and then there may be the quicker ones because there's already an established source that everyone, essentially knows that that's the right one. Thank you. That was a really good question because I don't think it's always easy to figure that out. There were 2 hands in the back.
I grabbed the mic though.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see that.
My name is Ashley Weber, and my question to everyone at the panel table is what's more important when you're hiring for employment? Is it personality or the resume, the information that you're seeing on the resume before you call in that person to the interview?
For the healthcare industry, the resume is going to get your foot in the door. And for radiological sciences, for example, it's going to be cookie cutter. I'm going to see the same things. I might see a variety of GPAs. I'm also going to look for your background and experiences. I can teach the skills, Forsyth Tech can teach the skills, but I'm looking for the right attitude and the right personality and the team environment and how you use that and translate that in the interview.
I would say that the resume is important to get you the initial interview, but in our case, if I was looking to hire somebody and it appeared that they were a good fit, I would rather have someone who had maybe less experience, but they were the right fit, than someone who had a lot of experience that did not appear to be the right fit. So in the interview, I think who you are is important, and are you a good fit for that position?
There was a question before about different age demographics. In my world of academia, I don't know exactly the percentage, but a large number of college faculty members are on their second or third career. They went back to school in their 30s or 40s or 50s and then got that PhD. So in my world, there's a cover letter with what we call a CV rather than a resume, so it's much thicker. That your personality comes through in that cover letter.
Good point.
That's where your personality comes through. Your qualifications are in that resume or that CV, and then putting those two together, that's how we can tell whether or not you need to come in for an interview.
The comment I would make is, be genuine, and that'll come through in your letter. It'll come through in your resume. Get your skills right up to the top of the resume. A lot of scanning is used now. My daughter works in HR, and she said that just literally they trash resumes because the skills don't pop into the mechanism that they use for figuring out who's qualified to come in. But the very first impression that you make in a lot of cases leads you to the next level of interviews. It's really funny. You kind of make up your mind with. A lot of people make up their mind, and I hate to say this, could I work with this person or can I not work with this person? And it happens very quickly in a person's mind. And what happens is, the opposite happens. If they don't, they kind of shut you down, and sometimes they miss a really good candidate. That's why a lot of times, especially here at the college, we don't use a particular person to do the hiring. You come and you usually meet a group of people, and then what we do is we deliberate. We all take notes and we deliberate.
I'm going to say for the fire service, it's kind of a hybrid of both, the resume and your personality. We go through a NeoGov hiring process. You mentioned HR, and a lot of it's basically what's scanned in through their application process is what's forwarded to us. And we will hire folks with a high school education or equivalent, but right off the bat from the interview process is stress the encouragement of the higher education. And we feel so strongly about it, we actually will pay a 5% increase for someone who's obtained an associate's and a 10% increase over a base salary for someone who has a bachelor's degree. And so again, it's that personality in a lot of cases that makes that person stand out. And we do hire high school grads, but with the changing of the industry, we are leaning more towards folks that are coming to us that do have that education, so we know that they have those soft skills along with those academic skills to be successful.
How about the folks in the back who've been waiting patiently?
When you're looking for people to hire, what do you expect? Do you look for people to be able to multitask, or do you look for them to be able to be talented in one skill? This is for everybody.
I'm confident that when a graduate leaves Forsyth Tech and achieves their boards for radiology, they're confident with their skill set. They can actually perform. They've been through clinicals and practicums to be able to do their job. What I hire for is their background experience. I look for how they performed. I'm going to call your clinical sites. I'm going to call your clinical instructor. I'm going to look for that personality and experience. When I bring you in for an interview, I'm going to ask experience-based questions, open-ended questions. Tell me about, give me an example of, and expect you to be confident answering those questions.
I would like to kind of blend the last two questions together with what you just said. You know, you're going to call whoever they were with in academics, and we do, and I would say probably for everybody here, we do check references. And time again, we'll have that stellar applicant that looks like that's who we want to hire. And a lot of times it's the reference and the person that they put down that kind of gives us that background, their ability to multitask. And that's huge in our world because everything happens so fast-paced. We have to be thinking 3 or 4 things ahead, especially when you talk about the technology piece. The individuals riding down the road, you can't text and drive, but if you're a police officer, you can type a letter on a computer and drive. No, don't take that back. But so being the ability to multitask and process all that information is huge, and again, making yourself stand out. So that professor that you had in school that you just had that little inclination that they didn't like you, you might not want to write them down as a reference.
This happens all the time. No matter what kind of a job you're applying for, or scholarship, or any kind of internship, any kind of opportunity, you want to choose your references wisely. And when you ask someone if they will be a reference, begin the sentence with, the question with, can you write me a positive reference? Can you be a positive reference for me? There are some situations where, yes, indeed, your pastor or some other person in your life like that might be an appropriate reference for a particular position. And then there are other situations where that person may not be the most appropriate reference. So choose your references wisely in the process.
Can I just, to the root of your question, multitasking versus, very focused task. If you're working on a protocol in our business, and it involves an experiment, or it leads up to maybe it's an experiment with an outcome, and I'm talking about using your hands and using an apparatus or a machine or whatever. We're going to make sure that you can run that protocol very well. You can think through that protocol. You can answer the steps, because we're going to ask you to check them off. We're going to ask you to sign that you did exactly what you were supposed to do. So, there's a little bit of difference. It depends on kinds of jobs that you're talking about. And so in the job that we would be looking at, where if you were on the bench or something, you would be very, very focused. You will not be, not be multitasking. You won't be on your cell phone. You won't be texting. You won't, it's almost as if you're driving a car, and it's just not something we would be looking for. But doesn't mean that when you go and do your work, when you're off the apparatus and you're off the protocol and you're gone to your work, whether or not you can, if you have that ability to do a few things, in sequence or at the same time, that's great. That's wonderful. But when you're in that lab, you're on that apparatus, you're following that protocol. That's not a multitasking situation.
And I would say in our industry, we hire people for very specific skill sets, but we also need them to be multitaskers. Because in our organization, we're a very small group, and you need to be able to answer the high-level questions, and you need to be able to take the trash out after we've had a meeting, and everything in between. And so we slice cheese for receptions and all that good stuff. And so in our organization, if you can't do all of that, then you're probably not in the right place. And so it really varies, I think, with what type of job you're looking for as to whether or not those are, which one of those would be the lead skill that you would need to have.
I would guess that that's true across the board for a small organization versus a large one. The small library where I work, I do many different things. In a great big library, I'd be funneled into one, very specific thing. So I like the variety. So if you like variety, a smaller organization might be a better fit. Other questions? Other hands in the back?
Just to kind of play on the last two questions, in the keynote we heard how employers that were researched kind of noted that the students were missing the fundamentally social aspect of doing research in the workplace. As local employers, do you guys see the same things? Is that something we need to be aware of as students?
I'm going to say probably our biggest, I didn't actually tap into the gap question. Probably our biggest thing that we see that's an issue is the speed that, like I said, initially when we hire, they go right into a school, a 26-week school. So the ability to process all that information quickly, and it does play into a part of multitasking and cataloging, and that's probably the biggest hurdle. And because it is state test and we are going through, we basically if you have to pass everything as you go along. If you fail 3 tests, that means termination for us. So there's a lot of pressure on that new hire to be able to gather all that information and be successful, again, continuing on with the academic of a testing process.
So we have had it reported back to us that, and this is right across the country because we have a national grant and we look at these best practices right across, and we have had it reported back that people skills, that whole idea of socialization, social interaction is something that students can work on. Not everybody's got that kind of thing in their personality, that they just want to be able to go and consult with other people and get their, they might be nervous about it or they might be shy about it. But, quite frankly, that's the way a lot of work happens now. It's done in teams. So, you're going to have to learn that skill.
I would advise, whatever your pathway is, take advantage of your work study, your practicums, your clinicals that you go to, because that's where you're going to develop your team skills.
Thank you. And thanks for asking that question, because that's one of the advantages of having someone present a research report and then have the actual subjects of the study there in the room to confirm or say not so much. And I will say that in general, aside from research, there are surveys of employers done regularly that ask for the top skills they're looking for. I can't remember off the top of my head the big one, but in the Project InfoLit study, we mentioned right near the top, there's a big organization that every 6 months asks employers, what are you looking for, what's most important? And teamwork is always in the top 5 things that they're, and not as necessarily as a gap or a problem, but that's one of the top in the top 5 skills that they're looking for, someone who can work well with teams. Other questions? I think there was another hand.
How tech savvy do you have to be this day and age to get a job with you guys? How tech savvy do you have to be to get a job with you guys?
I'm going to say what the first word that came to my mind, and she said it, very, very tech savvy. It goes without saying.
Yeah, again, imaging now is computerized, it's digital, the electronic medical record is all online. You got to be fairly tech savvy.
I'm always amazed, when I go and see my colleagues in automotive or whatever, you know, I don't know how many of you are mechanics there, but you know, I have. I was just writing an article. Somebody asked me to write an article on myself, and they said to me, "What do you like to do in your spare time?" And I said, "I like to tinker with my vintage Volvos." And the only reason why I like to tinker with my vintage Volvos is because if I lifted the hood up of a modern 2015 hood, I wouldn't even know what I was looking at. And it kind of resembles what I was used to when I was a kid, and you know, my dad or somebody else may have taught me how to do rudimentary mechanics. So I think the answer is everything is going software driven. Everything is very technical. You come over to our lab, and you see. Yesterday we were doing a tour of our labs with somebody who is an expert, and he kept on pointing to the servers that were running the instruments. You know, so what's that tell you?
I want to mention that a lot of times people assume that younger people are all tech savvy, and that was one thing that the employers noted in the study. But I don't know that that's always true, and I have students that will say to me, "I hate computers," or you know, students that it's not their thing. So if it is, I think, necessary, but you might consider it a necessary evil. You know, find your place in it and get what you need to know as far as the knowledge. But sometimes I think we do a disservice to young people by using the phrase "born digital," you know, assuming that everyone who's young is really into technology, and I don't think that's always the case. But it may be something that you just have to live with.
The ability to work a game controller is not the same thing as being tech savvy.
Good point. Are we out of time? Okay, I think we're out of time. Great questions. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
And if all of you will join us outside, we have a reception set up for you, and you'll get a chance to meet some of our panelists in our keynote if you have further questions. Thank you all for coming.
So I have
Nice to meet you too, Red.
12-year-old,
and then I'm going to
very
get my.
academic